Hey everyone, in this lesson we are going to be going over proportional editing inside of Blender. So first of all, let's just go ahead and create ourselves a flat surface. So for example, if you're creating a game and you want to make some terrain, or if you want to sort of add a bit of blending between the vertices. So for example, we can go up to Add, Mesh, then we'll go down to Grid. And what grid does is if we open up this little drop down, we can specify how many X and Y subdivisions there are. So right now it's on 10 and we can keep it like that. Let's just make the size a bit bigger. So we'll make the size 10. So it's a bit of a bigger grid here. Now, if I go into edit mode with tab, you'll see that we have a lot of basically slices. Okay, so this is a square that has been sliced up a bunch of times. Now, if you're just keeping it flat like this, then you probably wouldn't want to have this many faces, as that would be quite performance heavy. But what we can do then is modify the individual vertices. So for example, I can modify this vertice here and you'll see that it moves it up. I can move it around. I can scale it. The scaling doesn't really work on one vertice, but yeah, you can see that I can basically modify this vertice, but it doesn't really smooth out to the others. Okay, so I can of course go ahead, select multiple here, and yeah, as you can see, I can modify them, but it doesn't really, smooth it off. So how can we, for example, move this vertice up and have a smooth transition around it with all the others? Well, that's where proportional editing can come in handy. So at the top of your screen, you'll see there is a little dot icon right here, which is proportional editing with the shortcut O. So we can click on that, and to the right of it, you'll see basically the fall off. And this is basically the fall off curve. So by default, it's smooth. There's sphere, root, inverse sphere, etc. So let's have a look first of all at what it does. So I can select a vertice, move it up, and you'll see that nothing really happens. But if I hold down left mouse and use my scroll wheel, you'll see that this circle increases in size. And this basically shows us which vertices are going to be affected when we move this one. So if I make the circle about half the size of the grid and move it up, as you can see, the vertices surrounding this one are being moved as well. And you can see the further out, the less they are being affected. Okay, so the vertices closer to the one we have selected are being moved up more, and the ones further out are being moved less. And you can see the shape it makes is very similar to this smooth fall-off curve here. And so, for example, if you wanted to be more of a sort of stretch up, we can undo this here, change this here to sharp, move it up, and you'll see it is more sort of pointy like a mountain. We can also go ahead, change that over to linear if you just want a straight constant increase and decrease like so. And there are many others. Okay, there's constant, which basically moves them all up in the same rate. And if you're working on terrain or you want a bit of randomness, you can click on the random button right here, and this will sort of give a random fall-off curve to each of these. Okay, so it can add a bit of randomness and noise to your mesh. So when doing this, you can of course increase and decrease the size by using your scroll wheel at pretty much any time. Now, this also works if you want to select multiple vertices. So for example, let's just say we want to select a bunch of different vertices right here, and we increase those up. You'll see, yep, the exact same thing happens. We can also do the same for edges. So we can select just a bunch of random edges here, bring them up. There you go, we've got a couple of different hills, and of course, faces too. So yeah, proportional editing is really good if you want to basically modify a group of vertices and have them sort of smooth out. So this is especially good when creating terrain, for example, mountains. If you want to create sort of rocks and have, the sort of randomness even here, or if you want to add in some sharp inclines to things, yeah, proportional editing is a great tool. And it's something handy to always have in the back of your mind when working on game assets. Alright, so as a bit of a challenge, I want you to go ahead and create some basic terrain. Okay, what we're going to be doing here is I want you to go ahead and create a new grid, but this time, instead of having 10 divisions on each side, I want you to have 100 divisions, okay? So along the X and the Y axes, I want there to be 100 rows and 100 columns. So you can do that by creating a new grid. And then surrounding the square here. I want there to be mountains. You can add a bit of randomness. You can add some tall peaks, some short peaks, but just make it a terrain where in the middle we could place down objects for the player to walk around in and see mountains in the background. Okay, so I'll be right back to see how you're done. Alright, so I hope you had to go at that challenge pretty much. We just want to go add, mesh, go down to grid. We can set the X subdivisions to 100. Same thing for the Y. We probably might want to also increase the size a tiny bit, so let's just bring this up to 50. There we go. If we go to edit mode now, you'll see there is a lot of different faces right here. So we can go ahead, get our vertex selection right here, and just start selecting some vertices. So I'll select one there, one there, one there, one there. We'll even select some. Just add a bit of randomness as well here with the vertices we're selecting. And if we move it up, you'll see that's what we get there, but let's change it to be sort of a smooth increase. We can scroll our mouse wheel a bit until we get what we want, something like that. Then we can go ahead, select a few more vertices here. And then we might want to change it over to sharp, bring this up. And there you go, we've got a bit of mountains here. And then finally, we might want to add some randomness to this, so we can go ahead, select a bit more, like here. And then what we can do is we can change the fall off curve to be random here. And we can then increase this a tiny bit, probably bring it down a bit more, as that's quite a bit of randomness. Something like that, there we go. And as you can see here, we've just quickly chucked together a quick little piece of terrain that you can chuck into your game as a backdrop. So you don't just have the standard skybox and flat ground that you sometimes see in games. Instead, you can have a nice mountain range in the background. And then, of course, later on, you can go ahead and texture it and give it some color. So yeah, that is a look at the proportional editing tool inside of Blender. Thank you for watching. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at booleans inside of Blender. So first of all, we need to create two shapes. Let's go add, mesh, and let's go ahead and create ourselves a cylinder right here. Okay, so we can drag that over there. Then let's go ahead and add in a new mesh, and we're going to make this one, let's just say we're going to make it a UV sphere. Okay, just like that. So with our cylinder, I'm going to press S to scale it up a tiny bit. And with our sphere, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it inside of our cylinder like so. Okay, just not all the way in, but just enough so that we sort of have the cylinder intersecting, or the sphere intersecting the cylinder like that. So what we're going to be doing is we're basically going to be using this sphere as a cutting tool. We're going to be using this sphere as a tool to basically cut out a bit of this cylinder so it leaves basically a cylindrical or a spherical hole in the cylinder. So how do we do that? Well, we could of course go in with edge loops, extrusions and all that, but you know, that's quite messy. So a quick and easy way to do it is with booleans. So I'm going to select our cylinder here, and then in the properties window, I'm going to go down to where we have this wrench icon. And here is where we can add modifiers. Now in Blender, modifiers are basically these things that we can attach to objects in order to do many things, okay? We can have a bevel modifier, we can have masking, we can have some vertex weight paints and all that, we can add physics, we can add in an armature, so if you want to have a character animation, you can do that. You can add fluid, particles, pretty much anything can be done as a modifier. So we're going to go here under generate and select the Boolean modifier. Okay, now with the Boolean modifier, it needs an object that it's going to use in order to intersect it. So we can click on this little eyedropper icon right here and click on our sphere, just like that. So now what's happened is basically it has identified this sphere as the object we want to cut out of the cylinder. And you might not notice it just yet, but if we go up to the top right corner here, you'll see there are a different number of rendering modes. If we click on viewport shading and we click on this wireframe, it's going to switch over to wireframe. And it might be a bit hard to see, but you can see here that we have the orange of the cylinder wrapping around the sphere. So we can switch back to the normal viewport shading here. And if we go over into our Boolean modifier, and if we click on this little drop down arrow, we can hit apply, so those changes are made. We can then select our sphere, delete it, and here you go, we now have a spherical hole inside of our cylinder right here. Okay, we can hop into edit mode just like before and modify it just fine. So yeah, that is the Boolean modifier. We can also attach stuff using Boolean. So for example, let's undo all of this right here. Undo the Boolean modifier. Okay, let's add the Boolean modifier back on. We can then select the sphere as the object we want to use. And then what we can do is, right now it's set to difference. And difference basically means that we're going to subtract this sphere from the cylinder. We can also have intersect, which basically does the opposite. So as you can see, it's basically removed everything but what is inside of the sphere here. We then have union, which basically connects the two together. So we can apply the union like so. We can select the sphere, delete it. So now this sphere is now connected to this cylinder here. So yeah, that is the Boolean modifier inside of Blender. It's a very powerful tool that you can use in order to connect two meshes together. You can also set it to difference in order to subtract one from another. So if you want to create holes in meshes, for example, using Booleans is a very good way to do that. And thank you for watching. Hey everyone, and welcome. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at how we can texture an object inside of Blender. Okay, so let's just say you've created a 3D model and you want to apply a texture to it. So how do we do that? Well, let's just say already you have your texture and you want to apply it. Now, included in the course files, I have two textures right here that we can use. Okay, one of them is a metal texture like so, and the other is a rock texture like this one. And these are sourced from a website called Ambient CG. Okay, this is a public domain website where you can have a look at hundreds of different physically based rendered textures with all the different maps that you may need. Okay, so if you're looking for a great place for free textures, Ambient CG, it's public domain, it's totally free to use. Okay, and that is where these two textures are sourced from. So how do we get an image like this, for example, and apply it to a model here in Blender? Well, what we need to do is, let's just say, for example, we're just going to apply it to our default cube. So I'm just going to start off by deleting everything here, adding that cube back in so we don't have the light or the camera in our way. I'm going to select the cube, and then over inside of the properties window here, I'm going to go down to this little button, which looks like a red sphere. Okay, and this is our material window. Now, what we want to do is click on the new button right here, and this is going to create ourselves a brand new material. All right, and a material is basically what determines how an object is rendered, okay? What sort of shading is being applied. So that can involve, for example, the texture, that is the base color, how shiny it is, how rough it is, how metallic it is, and all sorts of other things that Blender, of course, provides, but game engines might not. So we're not going to be looking at that in too much detail. But what you can do is you can double click on the material here to give it a name. I'm just going to call this base material. And down here, you'll see there are a bunch of different sliders and options that we can change. But what we want to do is go over to the base color. Now, if I click on this here, I can of course change this color to whatever I want. But you won't notice that the cube is doing anything. Right now, it is still its default gray cube. So how do we actually see these changes of the material? Well, in order to get that, we want to go to the top right corner here where there are 4 different buttons. And these buttons right here are basically different ways of viewing our scene. So right now we are on viewport shading, which basically means that there's a universal gray shading applied to everything. But what we want to do is go over here to the material preview, which is right next to it. We want to click on that, and just, as you can see, our cube is now blue, and we can go ahead, change the color to whatever we want. I'm going to reset this back to white, so I'm just going to set all the values back to 1 here, just so when we apply our material there won't be any tint applied to it. We can change all sorts of things, such as how metallic it is. We can change the specular, so how large or how small the specular highlight is, the roughness, so if it's really reflective or if it's not very reflective. But how do we apply a texture to this? Well, if you scroll through here, you'll notice that there's no button that says apply texture, or there's no field for us to drag and drop a texture in. What we need to do is go over to base color right here, and what you'll see is there is this yellow dot. Now in Blender, whenever you see a yellow dot like this, it basically means that we can plug in something, okay? Everything here has a dot, for example. You have a yellow dot, you have a blue dot, you have a gray dot. Blue dots are vectors, okay? So they are basically multiple values. For example, a location is a vector, a rotation is a vector. And a gray dot basically means a value, okay? So a number, for example. The metallic, that is a number that can range between 0 and 1. So that is a gray dot, whereas something like emission or base color, that allows us to plug in an image. It allows us to plug in a texture. So what I'm going to do is up at base color here, I'm going to click on this yellow dot, and you'll see this window pops up. And this basically allows us to choose which sort of texture we want to apply. Now, we're going to go pretty simple here. We're just going to go over to image texture, select that one. And you'll see right now it is pretty much black because we have no texture applied. But what we can do then is click on the open button, which has now appeared, and we want to basically select our texture. So I'm going to navigate over to the folder where the texture is located. Here it is right here. We got the rock color. I'm going to select it, click open image, and as you can see, that rock is now applied to the cube. Okay, so we now have this texture applied to our cube, and if we were to export it, add to our game engine, as long as you export it as an FBX, the texture should come along automatically with it, so that should be no problem right there. So yeah, that is how we can apply a texture to an object here inside of Blender, but you will notice that, the proportions might be off. For example, you might want this part of the rock over here, you might want this face to be a different part of the rock texture, and that is where the system of UV mapping comes into play. Now, UV mapping is what we're going to be looking at in future lessons, and basically that allows us to determine which part of the texture gets rendered on which part of the 3D model. So, adding a texture like this is fairly straightforward, yet when it comes to UV mapping, that's where we will be spending most of our time, as there are many different methods of how we can go about doing it, because different objects require different forms of UV mapping, but we'll be going over a wide range of those. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then in the next lesson. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to have a look at UV mapping. So, first of all, I've got ourselves a cube right here. I'm going to go ahead over to the materials panel. I'm going to go ahead and create a new material, and I'm going to set the base color to be a image texture here. I'm then going to apply a texture to this object right here. I'm going to give it a let's give it a metal texture like this one right here. Okay. Now, what happens if, for example, we want this part of the metal texture to be over here, or we want the texture in general to be scaled down, scaled up, moved around? Well, in that case, we can look at UV mapping. So up at the top, you'll see there is a bunch of different layouts. We have modeling, sculpting, UV editing, and that's the one we want to go to. So I'm going to click on UV editing right here, and what you'll see is two windows. On the right hand side, we have our scene view like normal, and it set us over into edit mode. And on the left hand side, we can zoom out here, and you'll see that we have our texture laid out right here. And on top of that texture, you'll see we have each face of our cube. So we got our 6 faces of the cube laid out on top of the texture right here. And if we, on the right hand side, for example, if we go over, click on material preview up at the top right, so we can actually preview the material. What we can see is if we go into face edit mode and we select a face, you'll see that face gets highlighted here on the left hand side. If we select another, that one gets highlighted, and so on. We can press A to select all the faces, and on the left hand side, if we then go up to the top left, and just like in edit mode, we have vertex selection, edge selection, and face selection. If we select face selection, we can click on a face here and move it around. So if I select a face and I press G, you can see I can move it around, and look what happens on the right hand side. As I move the face around on the left hand side, the area of the texture of which it is sampling from, and which all the other faces are sampling from, changes. Okay, so as I move it around here, you'll see it's sampling from a different part of the texture, and you'll see it's also getting stretched. Some of these cubes are getting stretched, so that's why we do have that weird warping happening. But yeah, as you can see, this is basically how UV mapping works. We get a 3D object and we unwrap it, okay? We basically convert a 3D object into a 2D image that we can then lay on top of a texture, and whatever texture is underneath it is the pixels that it is sampling in order to display on our screen. So, for example, we can select the middle one here, press S, and we can scale it up. So it's sampling a much larger area, whereas this face is over here. We can scale it up, and as you can see, the texture is getting smaller, but if I scale it down, the texture is getting bigger because the area it's sampling is changing. We can also rotate things, so I can press A here to select all of it. I can press R and rotate it around like so. And as you can see, the texture is being rotated. Okay, so we've got that there. Right now, we've got our cube. Now, when it comes to cubes, they're pretty simple objects. They're one of the most sort of simple 3D objects you can have. So unwrapping this sort of thing is fairly simple, okay? In fact, it does it automatically for us right here with each of the individual faces. All right, so we've got a UV here on the left, but you'll notice that when we select a square, for example, let's just say we want to sample this face down here somewhere. Well, if we select that face and press G to move it, you'll see that it drags all the others with it and it just distorts it, not in a nice way. So how can we, for example, get this face and sort of disconnect it from the rest so we can move it freely around? Well, in order to do that, what we want to do is go up to the top left here, and you'll see there's a little drop down next to where we can select vertex, edge, or face, and we want to click on that, and there's 3 different things. We have disabled, shared location, and shared vertex. This basically determines when we select a face, how is it going to modify other faces? And we, of course, want to go to disabled, as that basically means now we can select any face here, press G, and move it around without any of the others being connected to it, okay? Whereas before, if we were to click on one, it would sort of move the other vertices around as well. Whereas now, we are free to move these around wherever we want, rotate them, scale them, just like so, okay? And that is how we can do UV mapping inside of Blender. And of course, when you go to export this model, all of your UVs are automatically baked into the model itself, so it'll all be carried over, and you can even replace it with any other texture you want. So for example, if you go into your game engine and you no longer want a metal texture, and instead you want some other texture, the same UV map is going to apply. Okay, so you have this square image right here, and no matter what texture you put on here, these exact UVs are always going to be here until you change them inside of a 3D modeling program like Blender, okay, because it bakes this information into the model itself. Now, in the next lesson, we are going to go over the process of unwrapping multiple different objects, okay? So I'll see you all then in the next lesson. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be preparing our model ready to be rigged. Now, what I mean by preparing our model is setting it up so that once we start rigging it, we're not going to run into any problems that we might bump into later on. So let's get started. First of all, what we're going to do is make sure that our model's normal directions are all facing the correct direction. Now, what is a model's normal directions? Well, you see on our models, we have faces. On our torso, for example, we have a face at the front, one on the side, one on the back. On our head, we have a bunch of faces going around, one on the top, one on the bottom. And with these faces, they each have a direction that they are facing, or more so, the vertices right here have a direction that they are pointing. Now, it's important when 3D modeling that you don't really have inside-out 3D models. Now, that might sound obvious, but when we were actually creating this model right here, we do in fact have inside-out models, and that occurs when we are flipping them over. When we are setting up the left arm here and the leg over here, we flip them over by inversing the X scale, okay? And what that caused is not only to create a mirror copy of it, but in fact invert it as well. So these normal directions, or these models' faces, are actually pointing to the inside of the model compared to this one on the right, which is pointing outwards. So how can we see that first of all? Because right now they look exactly the same. Well, what we're going to do is we're first of all going to select our model over here. Okay, I'm selecting the arm that we started with. Press tab to go into edit mode. And if we go at the top right corner here and click on this arrow, go down and select this face icon underneath normals, okay? And what this is going to do is basically show the normal direction for each face. And you can of course change the size as well here. Okay, and as you can see, we have lines pointing outwards on all of these faces right here. Even on the inside, we can see there is a little blue line pointing outwards from this side face here. So that means the normals are pointing in the direction of these blue lines. Now let's press tab, select the other arm and press tab, and you'll see we don't really see any of those normal arrows. But if we go into the drop down here and increase the size, you'll see they start to poke out. And what this is in fact the faces from the other side of the model pointing through, okay? So that means that this model here is inside out. So what we need to do is we need to press F3 and we want to type recalculate, and you'll see we have recalculate outside right here, hit enter, and as you can see our normals have now been recalculated and they are now pointing in the correct direction. We can press tab again, and to make this process faster, we're going to first of all go ahead and combine all of our models into a single mesh, okay? Because we don't want to have separate models here that we can accidentally move around. So I'm going to press A to select everything, and then go Control J to join them all. And as you can see here under cylinder, we now have a single mesh that we can select. Now, if I press tab to go to edit mode, you'll see that we have the normals here, okay? On the left-hand side here, they're all correct. But as you can see on the right-hand side, these arrows are a lot shorter because they're poking through the entire model. So I'm going to go A to select everything, F3, recalculate outside, and there we go. All of the normal directions have now been fixed. We can bring this down a tiny bit here, like so. And as you can see, all of the model's faces are now pointing in the same direction. Now, if we were to leave it how it was, throughout Blender, it generally would look the same, but once you import it then into a game engine or into some other software, you'll notice that these faces are going to be very, very dark, and it'll look quite trippy because you're looking at the backside of the inside of the model, which, is something that is good to fix early on before you notice it, after you texture it, after you do everything, and then import it into your game engine. So we've got our model here, we've got everything set up correctly. We've even got it set up as a single mesh so we can move it around like that. What we're going to do now is just orientate it in our scene where we want. So I'm going to get into a side view here, I'm going to press G, I'm going to hold shift so it snaps, and I'm just going to have the feet sitting down like so. Okay, so we're just going to make it so that the feet are basically sitting on the ground like so, just on the red line. And what we then want to do is go over to the left hand side and click on this little icon right here, which is going to bring up the move gizmo. And this basically shows us where the model's pivot point is. So if we rotate from here, as you can see, we're rotating based on the arm. But we want to set the pivot point down to the center here, okay? It's just general good practice to have the center of the model defined at the base of its feet. When working with game engines and other software, it goes a long way, and you don't have to then find some workaround to set it up properly. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to press F3, and we are going to go set origin, okay? And we're going to go down to where it says origin to 3D cursor, which is this little circle right here. Hit enter. As you can see, the move gizmo has now been set down at the base of our model's feet. Okay, so if we want to rotate it or modify it, it's going to rotate and modify based off this pivot point. So there we go. We'll get everything there set up. And now what we can do is begin the process of actually creating our rig. Okay, one final thing, let's rename this one to our, let's go humanoid model. And now we're ready to begin. So in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and begin setting up our armature, okay? We're going to set up our bones for all of our joints, and then from there, we're going to go into weight painting. We're going to make sure that all of the bones are behaving correctly. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next lesson. Hey everyone, and welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to begin rigging our 3D character. So first of all, what do I mean by rigging? Well, in Blender and many other 3D software, rigging is basically like creating a skeleton for a 3D mesh. And this skeleton allows us to rotate and modify the bones in order to rotate the rest of the mesh, okay? So the way it normally works is that you'll have a root here in the center, which basically acts as the center position or the main bone of the structure. This will then branch off to the shoulders, to the elbows, to the wrists, etc. We then have the neck for the head. We then have the other arms. So we have the other shoulder, the other elbow, the other wrist. This also then goes down to the legs, the knees, and the ankles, okay? And these are basically the connections. So you can of course make this as complex or as simple as you wish. Some 3D models will only have a handful of bones, while others may have quite a few, as you might want to rig each individual finger joint, each individual toe joint. Really, it's entirely up to you, but for us, we're going to keep it nice and simple, okay? We're just going to have one joint for our hands and feet. So let's get started with creating our rig. So inside of Blender, a rig is known as an armature. Okay, so we can go over to add and down to where it says armature right here. And this is going to create our armature along with our first bone. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to bring this up and position it right about here, okay? And press tab to go into edit mode. Now, the first problem is that our armature is inside of our character model, so we can't actually see it. So a way we can bypass this is by enabling X-ray mode. I'm going to go to the top right corner here, click on this little down arrow, and select X-ray. So now we can see through our model, and we can select and modify our armature. So this here is a bone, okay? Now a bone on itself doesn't really do anything. Instead, what we need to do is connect other bones to it to create a sort of bone tree hierarchy in order to then be able to move our arms, have our body rotate, which rotates the arms along with it. We'll get into that. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the top bone right here, and we are going to press E to extrude. And what this will do is create ourselves a new bone connected to the previous, and we're going to bring this up to the neck like so, okay? And then from here, we can press E again and move this into the head. So what we have done here is pretty much this bone right here is going to be our chest. This bone is going to be sort of our stomach or our center region, and this here is going to be our head. So now what we can do is from this center one right here, or our root actually, we're going to press E and bring this down, and this is going to act as our pelvis, okay? So that is the main center spine setup right here. Now we can move on to the arms. So for the arms, I'm going to select the upper body chest bone right here, press E, extrude that over to the left arm like so, press E again to bring that over to the elbow, and E again for the hand. And finally for our arm, we need to add one more bone, which is going to go into the hand like so. Okay, so now here we have our shoulder bone, our elbow bone, and our hand bone right here. So let's go ahead and now duplicate these in order to flip them over to the other side. So I'm going to select all 4 of our bones here, Shift D, I'm then going to go scale X -1, and we can then move it over like so. Okay, so by pressing G, then X to move it along the X axis, just like that. And what we need to do is actually connect this bone up, because as you can see right now, it's disconnected. So what we need to do is we need to select it, go over to the bone icon down here in the properties window, and under the relations tab here, we just want to enable connected. And as you can see, it is now connected to this center bone right here. So everything should move like so. Okay, so we've got our arms, we've got our head, we've got our spine here. Now we need our legs. And as a bit of a challenge, I want you to go ahead and try setting up the legs, okay? It's done in pretty much the exact same way as with our arms. Okay, so we're going to select this bone, extrude it, create our legs, and then create our other legs. So have a go at that, and I'll be right back to see how you're done. Okay, so I hope you had a go at that. Pretty much, we just need to press E. This is then going to extrude out like so. We can then press E again to create one for our knee, and then another one for our ankle. And from our ankle, we then want to extrude this out into our foot, okay? So here we have our foot joint, here we have our knee joint, and here we have our main upper leg joint, okay? And this is the connection to our leg. And then to create our other leg, we're just going to select all of these like so, Control D, scale by pressing S, on the x-axis, -1. Okay, and moving that over like so, selecting this bone and enabling connected. Okay, so make sure then that this is all connected up like so. Okay, so when we move this center bone here, it moves the root and the legs. Okay, so they're all connected. All right, and that is our rig set up and ready to go. In the next lesson, we are going to be looking at actually then combining this and merging it into our mesh so we can then start posing it. We're going to give names to each of our bones and then going on into weight painting. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then in the next lesson. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at how we can actually combine this armature to our mesh right here, okay? Because right now, this armature is a separate object from our mesh, and modifying it isn't going to move our mesh around. So what we need to do is let's hop over into object mode by pressing tab. And what we're going to do is we're going to select our armature, hold shift and select our model, okay? Make sure it is in this order, okay? Select the armature first, then select the model. And from here, we can press Control P, and this is going to open up the parent window, okay? And basically, we can choose to parent this in different ways. What we're going to do is go over to Armature Deform and select with automatic weights, okay? So this is going to generate automatic weights, which is something we'll look at in a future lesson. Okay, but for now, you can see over here, the armature has combined into a single object, and now we are pretty much ready to pose it and see how it works. So what we can do is we can go over to object mode. Oh, we need to select the armature, go over to pose mode right here, and we can then select a bone, press R to rotate, and as you can see, we can now rotate the arm like so. We can rotate an elbow, and we can rotate the hand. We can then rotate the sort of upper body like so. We can rotate our legs, our knees, and our feet like so. Okay, so just make sure everything has the ability to rotate the way that you want it to do. But you may notice that with the arms, when we rotate it, it rotates the body along with it. So if we rotate the arms like this, it kind of looks a bit weird. That is something we will be fixing with weight painting. Same thing for the leg right here. It sort of morphs the body a bit, which is not exactly what we want. So yeah, there we go. We've got our armature now combined to our mesh. One more thing we are going to do is name our bones, because right now, if we open up our armature, open up pose, and look into our bones here, you'll see that they are all named very different things, okay? And what we need to do is fix this by giving them names. And this is going to help us out when doing weight painting, or just in general, some programs may be reading the bones for a specific direction or name, so it's good to give them a name. Okay, so first of all, we have this bone right here, which we can call the pelvis. This one right here, which we can call our spine. This one right here, which we can call our chest. We then have our neck. Okay, over here we can have our, actually no, we'll do this one first. This one is going to be our right hand side because this is the direction that our model is looking, so this is going to be its right arm, and for that what we're going to do is call this shoulder underscore R, okay, for shoulder underscore right. We then have elbow underscore R, and we then have wrist underscore R. Same thing for the left hand side. Here we have shoulder underscore L, we have elbow underscore L, and wrist underscore L. Okay, for these parts here, we are just going to rename this one to be upper arm underscore L, and this one is going to be upper arm underscore R. Now, down here for our legs, this one here is going to be upper leg underscore R. We then have our leg underscore R. We then have our knee underscore R and our ankle underscore R. Same thing for the left-hand side here. And there we go. So now over here inside of the hierarchy, we can see we have our spine, upper arm L, inside of that shoulder L, elbow L, and wrist L. Okay, same for everything else. Make sure that they are all got the correct naming. Okay, there we go. And from here, what we can do is a number of things. Okay, if you're happy with your model, you can go ahead, export it, add it to whatever software you're using. But as you can see here, like I said, with the rotations on the arms, it is a bit weird on the upper body. So what we're going to do is modify the weight painting. So that is something we're going to be looking at in the next lesson. So I'll see you all then.